Black Sabbath. The name alone once struck fear into the establishment and lit a fire in the hearts of rock fans around the world. In the early 70s, they weren't just another rock band. They created heavy metal. Albums like Paranoid and Master of Reality turned distorted riffs, thundering bass, and dark lyrics into an entirely new language. They were unstoppable, or so it seemed. But by the end of the decade, the magic was gone. The once untouchable titans of heavy music looked tired, broken, and outdated. Critics dismissed them, fans drifted away, and behind the scenes, the band was crumbling under the weight of exhaustion, addiction, and bitter tension. By 1979, it looked like the story of Black Sabbath had reached its tragic final chapter. Their frontman, Ozzy Osbourne, was gone. The music industry had already written their obituary. But what nobody saw coming was the arrival of a man whose voice was bigger than his body, whose lyrics carried entire worlds, and whose determination to keep metal alive would resurrect the dying giant. That man was Ronnie James Dio. This is the story of how Heaven and Hell, the 1980 masterpiece, didn't just revive Black Sabbath, it redefined them, it saved them from extinction, and in doing so, it reshaped the future of heavy metal forever. By 1978, Black Sabbath was barely recognizable as the same band that once terrified parents and inspired generations of young headbangers. Nearly a decade of non-stop touring and recording had drained the life out of them. The signs were everywhere. Their 8th studio album, Never Say Die, was released in 1978, and it landed with a thud. Unlike earlier records that instantly became classics, this one felt disjointed. Critics described it as uninspired. Fans weren't rushing to record stores. For the first time in their career, Sabbath seemed irrelevant. And at the heart of the chaos was Ozzy Osbourne. The Prince of Darkness had always been unpredictable, but by the late 70s, his drinking and drug use were spiraling out of control. He stopped showing up to rehearsals. He fought with bandmates. Sometimes, he didn't even know what city he was in. Tony Iommi, the mastermind behind Sabbath's riffs, was frustrated. Geezer Butler, the lyricist and bassist, was burned out. Drummer Bill Ward was struggling with his own addictions. It wasn't just a band in trouble. It was 4 men at war with themselves. The breaking point came in 1979. Ozzy was officially fired. It wasn't a dramatic announcement. It was more like a sad, inevitable ending. The man who had defined their sound was gone. For many, that should have been the death certificate for Black Sabbath. Bands rarely survive losing their frontman, especially one as iconic as Ozzy. Fans wondered, who could possibly step into those shoes, and why should Sabbath even try? The truth was simple. Without a miracle, Black Sabbath was finished. That miracle came in the form of a 5'4" singer with the voice of a giant, Ronnie James Dio. Born Ronald James Padavona in New Hampshire, Dio had already built a career in bands like Elf and Rainbow, where he sang alongside Ritchie Blackmore, the legendary guitarist who had also left Deep Purple. In Rainbow, Dio showcased a vocal style that was soaring, operatic, and deeply powerful. Where most rock singers relied on grit and swagger, Dio brought precision. But it wasn't just his voice that stood out. Dio had a gift for lyrics. Instead of writing about drugs or women, he created entire mythologies. Dragons, rainbows, swords, heaven, hell. His songs sounded like chapters ripped out of epic fantasy novels. When Tony Iommi first met Dio in 1979, it wasn't at a concert. It was at a chance encounter in a nightclub. They talked about music, they talked about direction, and they realized they had something in common. Both wanted a fresh start. Soon after, Dio was invited to jam with Sabbath. The result? Magic. Iommi's heavy riffs collided with Dio's sky-high vocals in a way that felt brand new. Ozzy's raw, almost chaotic energy had defined early Sabbath. Dio brought sophistication, power, and a new sense of purpose. Still, fans were skeptical. Replacing Ozzy Osbourne seemed impossible. But for the band, there was no choice. It was either try something new with Dio or fade into history as another band destroyed by its own success. So they took the gamble, and the sessions for their next album began.
The recording sessions for what would become Heaven and Hell marked a rebirth for Black Sabbath. After years of dysfunction, the atmosphere felt alive again. Tony Iommi later described it as if a weight had been lifted. Dio's energy recharged him. Suddenly, riffs were flowing. Song structures became tighter. The music felt sharper, heavier, more dramatic. One of the first songs they worked on was Children of the Sea. Iommi had come up with the acoustic riff years earlier, but it never quite fit with Ozzy's vocal style. When Dio heard it, he began improvising lyrics about oceans, myths, and creation. Within hours, the song had transformed into a haunting masterpiece. It was the perfect symbol of what Dio brought to Sabbath, a fresh lens through which their riffs could breathe. Then came the title track, Heaven and Hell. At over 7 minutes, it wasn't just a song, it was an odyssey. Dio's lyrics balanced light and darkness, good and evil, heaven and hell. Fans would later say it captured the eternal conflict at the heart of metal itself. The faster, heavier Neon Nights was chosen as the opening track, a bold, energetic statement that Sabbath was back with a vengeance. Meanwhile, songs like Die Young and Lonely Is the Word showed off Dio's ability to combine melancholy with power. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. Drummer Bill Ward struggled during the sessions. His personal battles with alcohol made it hard for him to keep up. Sometimes he'd vanish for days. Still, the rest of the band pressed on, determined not to let the momentum die. The final product was unlike anything Sabbath had ever done. It was still heavy, but it was also grand, cinematic, and infused with Dio's unique brand of mysticism.
When Heaven and Hell hit shelves in April 1980, the reaction was immediate. Fans who had doubted whether Black Sabbath could survive without Ozzy were shocked. This wasn't a band limping on with a replacement singer. This was a reborn Black Sabbath. Dio wasn't copying Ozzy. He was doing something entirely different. Critics who had once trashed the band now had to eat their words. Suddenly, magazines that had labeled Sabbath dinosaurs were calling Heaven and Hell a triumph. Radio stations gave heavy rotation to Neon Nights. Concert arenas filled with fans eager to see the new lineup. The album reached the top 10 in the UK and broke into the top 30 in the US. More importantly, it made Black Sabbath feel dangerous again. They weren't a washed-up 70s act. They were a band leading heavy metal into the new decade. Of course, not every fan accepted Dio at first. Some hardcore Ozzy loyalists dismissed the new sound. But for the growing wave of metal fans in the 1980s, Heaven and Hell wasn't just a comeback, it was a declaration of war.
Looking back today, Heaven and Hell isn't just considered one of the best Black Sabbath albums. It's hailed as one of the most important heavy metal records of all time. For Sabbath, it proved they could survive losing a frontman as iconic as Ozzy. For the genre, it showed that heavy metal could evolve. It didn't have to be stuck in the past. Dio's fantasy-driven lyrics opened the door for bands like Iron Maiden, Queensryche, and countless others to embrace storytelling and world-building. The songs from the album have become staples of metal history. Heaven and Hell is still performed by bands around the world. Children of the Sea remains one of Dio's most beloved tracks, and Neon Nights still explodes with youthful energy more than 4 decades later. But perhaps the greatest legacy of Heaven and Hell is that it gave Black Sabbath a second life. Without it, the band likely would have ended in 1979. Instead, they went on to record more with Dio, inspire an entire new generation, and cement their place not just as pioneers, but as survivors.
In the end, Heaven and Hell was more than just an album. It was a resurrection, a testament to the power of reinvention, and proof that sometimes, when everything seems lost, all it takes is one spark to light the fire again. Black Sabbath could have ended in the shadows of the 70s. Instead, thanks to Ronnie James Dio and the brilliance of Heaven and Hell, they rose again, stronger, louder, and more legendary than ever. So here's the question for you. What's your favorite track from the album? Is it the thunder of Neon Nights, the haunting beauty of Children of the Sea, or the epic journey of Heaven and Hell itself? Drop your pick in the comments. I'll be featuring fan favorites in a future video. And if you want more deep dives into the stories behind the greatest albums in rock and metal history, make sure you're subscribed, because this is just the beginning.